We're Escazú Chocolates.
Welcome to our tasting.
All right, everybody, let's jump in and eat some chocolate. In your kit, you're gonna have a wrapped chocolate tile. Go ahead and get that out and open it up. This is our calibration tile.
Calibration is what we're going to do in order to get our palates ready for our tasting. So enjoy this chocolate while we'll tell you a little bit about it.
Let's start with what happens on the farm before we ever receive the cacao. Danielle, do you want to tell us a little bit about where cacao grows?
Yeah, absolutely. Cacao grows 20 degrees north or south of the equator, and that is called the cacao belt. So places in Latin America, Africa, and some places in Asia.
And it grows kind of different from other fruit, right?
A little bit, yeah. And I love it because you'll see how it grows off the trunk of the trees, and it's these trunks just filled with fruit and then some in the branches, but it's very cool to see that, yeah.
And I remember us tasting cacao at Escazú. It had a really unexpected flavor, but it looked like a tropical fruit. Like it reminded me of mango.
Absolutely. So it looks, the outside of it it's very brightly colored, yellows, oranges, greens, reds, depending on the type of cacao. It'll also have different textures, which is very cool. And then when you open it up, it does have that very tropical, like passion fruit, banana, lychee kind of aroma to it.
But it looks like a white corn on the cob.
It does. It looks a little weird, just a little weird. And that is absolutely the best way to describe it. Giant corn on the cob that is white.
So most people probably haven't had cacao fruit or seen it in the stores because it's very perishable. So the harvesting that happens at the farm is interesting as well, right?
Correct. So immediately after harvesting, like no more than 2 days, all those pods get opened up and all that weird looking corn on the cob stuff goes into these big fermentation boxes. And they're just big wooden boxes where all that stuff gets just thrown in. And that white stuff that is very fruity and fragrant, the thing that makes it smell tropical is what's going to give most chocolates is like fruity characteristics, right? And that is because that fruit during the fermentation process, because of temperature and all of these agents, it's just going to disintegrate. And after 5 to 10 days, we're going to be left with just the beans. Which is very cool.
Which is very cool.
Yeah.
But even then, it's not over. They do so much at the farm.
Yeah.
Because they have, one of my favorite things that you have pictures of are these amazing drying patios. Because obviously after they are fermented and all of that juiciness comes off, they're still really sticky, but they need to become shelf stable so that they can ship it and it doesn't get all moldy and gross. And so they have these gigantic drying patios.
Very cool.
And a lot of places will sun dry them, which I think is beautiful. Some of them have it covered so that it's a little bit less weather dependent, but they'll let them dry so that all that sticky residue kind of dries off, and then they can package them up to ship them to us in Raleigh. And after that, we start our process. Once those beans make their way to Raleigh, our first step in the process is hand sorting them. What we do is we will pour a scoop of beans on a table and pick through them with our hands, looking for anything that isn't a perfect bean, because cacao, as we mentioned, it grows, it's natural, sometimes it's imperfect. And we're just using this step of the process to make sure that we're only moving forward with perfect beans and also not letting anything that isn't a bean or maybe is a little bit of treasure gets portioned out too. And after we have perfect beans, about 300-ish pounds of it, we'll move on to the next step in the process, which is roasting.
Yeah, so we have these anywhere between 150 to 300 pounds that we throw into our antique ball roaster, who we call Lady Godiva. And it's really cool. It roasts low and slow, which we like, but we do every roast different for each origin. So we roast one origin at a time. And then we also, there's so many factors that can affect how we roast. So the time is going to be different depending on the harvest, depending on the weather, right? And depending on the origin as well. And then once we roast it, we completely cool it down, and then we move on to the next part.
The next step in the process is winnowing. And that's a process by which we're gonna separate out the papery outer shell of the cocoa bean from the meaty interior, which is called the nib. And the nib can be an end product in itself. You may have eaten it in granola or cookies or maybe a smoothie, but we're gonna take about 99% of our nibs and turn them into chocolate. And we do that with our grinders.
So once we get to our grinders, which we have 2 of them, and they both have names, we name all of our machines. They are 2 stone wheels with a stone base, and we add our nibs in. Now, keep in mind that cacao is about 50% of it is fat, which we call cocoa butter. And during this grinding process, that fat is going to be released and mixed in with the solids, therefore making chocolate. So we could potentially have chocolate pretty much then,
with
right?
just nibs.
Exactly.
100%.
100%, or cacao liquor, technically. However, we add the sugar, right? Once we have all of our cacao liquor, we add our sugar, and then we grind it for about 3 to 4 days.
And this is where the percentage of that you see on your bars comes in.
So if you wonder sometimes, like, what is this percentage thing? 65, 80, what does that mean? It means that 60% or 65 or 80% of your chocolate is cacao. The rest is going to be sugar, or in the case of milk chocolate, it will be milk and sugar. When we roast it, we roast one origin at a time, right? But when we are grinding, we'll either grind one origin at a time so that we can achieve our single origins, or we will put several origins in the grinder so that we can make our blends. It helps us kind of get a consistent chocolate flavor, and we use that mostly for our bars with inclusions and for our confections. That way we have a base flavor that we can just enhance with. It can make all the other flavors that we're going to put in shine. And then so once we have that chocolate, after it's ground for 3 to 4 days, we finally pour it out. We put it through a sifter to make sure that it's super smooth, and then we pour it out into these like big chunky blocks that you just want to eat. And then we let it set and just get all of those flavors come together and be beautiful for our next step.
When the chocolate comes out of the grinders, it's untempered. You may have seen untempered chocolate at your house if you've ever had a bar that melted and then re-solidified. Untempered chocolate is crumbly, it can feel a little dry in your mouth, and on the outside it might have some white streaks or some sugar crystals. For us to get our chocolate into its finished product form, it needs to go through another process called tempering.
Now, did you hear that? That is the sound of a really good tempered chocolate. Now, tempering is the process by which, through agitation and temperature, all the fat and sugar crystals are going to align and be so small that it will create a shiny, snappy chocolate the way we like it and the way you like it. And then once we have it tempered, we will go pour it into our mold by pouring it into bars, or when we do our confections, we pour it in. But anytime that you want shiny, snappy chocolate that is going to melt smoothly in your mouth, you have to temper it. So,
and then once we have all those finished products, the next step is to package it up, which again we do
by hand.
All by hand.
Yep.
And then once those beautiful things are in beautiful temper, in beautiful packaging, they make their way to you guys. It's time to taste chocolate. Danielle, would you mind giving us a little overview on how to properly taste chocolate?
Absolutely. And okay, so to taste chocolate, first you want to smell it, if you want to though, but why wouldn't you? And then we're gonna do a little snap to make sure that it's tempered properly. If you have a nice crisp snap, it was a good temper. And if it's a little dull, maybe it wasn't a good temper, or benefit of the doubt always, maybe it got a little too hot somewhere and it just fell out of temper. not to worry, still delicious. So once we have it, we're gonna take
One bite.
one piece and we're just gonna swirl it. You don't have to worry about thinking because we all know we wanna eat chocolate right away. You're just gonna eat it, bring your palate to chocolate again, in this case to specific chocolate that we're gonna be tasting. And then your second bite, that's the one that you're going to study, you're gonna think about. Now, when it's time to start thinking about those flavors, we have this very cool flavor wheel.
Which is great.
It's
Because
really good.
Sometimes you have a flavor
At the tip of your tongue.
and you can't put a name to it, which happens to me all the time. I'm like, I recognize this, but I don't know what to call it. And this wheel kind of helps you with that.
It really does. So you can look at it beforehand because sometimes there are flavors that you don't even think about and you're like, of course. And then you can also look at it as you're tasting and sometimes you're like, oh my gosh, this feels familiar. And it doesn't have to be that, it can be something else. And to me, or to us, to you, sometimes a flavor, it's not even a flavor, it's an experience, it's a memory. And a lot of times I'll taste something and be like, oh my gosh, it tastes like that time I was at the beach with my friend. And it's like a whole experience that you're tasting. So tasting, you can taste flavors, or you can taste a memory, or you can taste an experience, or a feeling even.
Yeah.
And we always like to say there is no wrong answer because you taste what you taste and you like what you like.
The tasting wheel is to help you put some words to things, but it is in no way all inclusive for what could be what you taste in your chocolate.
And we will walk you through when we change to each bar. We're going to tell you what to do. So we're going to drink a little bit of water to kind of cleanse our palate from that particular bar. And then we're going to do the calibration with that particular chocolate right before we start studying it. So
I'm excited.
let's do it. Where did she go? Tiana! There you are.
Hi.
Hey!
I didn't mean to be late. But
You're barely late.
Oh, okay. All right.
The most important part is that, is this what we're tasting now?
Yes, sea salt bar. I got it. I grabbed it. We have it. I'm
Sea salt
excited.
bar.
Our number one seller.
Number one seller.
Everybody loves it.
Everybody loves it. So,
But we should definitely eat it. But before we get started, the chocolate on the plates,
oh my God, I know.
it's gorgeous.
Guys, let me tell you, it's very cool. Before you eat any of this chocolate, take a look at the color difference, right? So these are all technically dark chocolate. I know that we have a milk chocolate, but it's 60%, which is still considered dark. However, even if you were to put the 80% next to the 65%, look at how dark the 80% looks. It's a nice, dark, rich brown. And then we have the goat's milk, which is obviously a little lighter, a little bit more reddish. And then we have the 65, which is a little bit closer in color to the goat's milk than to the 80. And I don't know about you, but we find it fascinating. It's very cool.
Fun. Now let's get to eating the chocolate.
You guys excited? We are.
So like Danielle mentioned, the first one, we're just gonna pop in our mouths and enjoy it. If you've had anything to eat before this, it's always good to...
you had anything to eat after your calibration.
After your calibration.
round. Yeah. You can have a little sip of water.
A sip of your room temperature water will just make sure that you're starting at a neutral place. All right, let's break off our first bite. And one thing to note on the salt, because we do put the salt on by hand, just make sure that the piece that you have has a good amount of salt on it. And enjoy.
Just enjoy this one, remember? Just eat it. Okay. Now,
That was enjoyable.
that was delicious, right?
Yes.
But we haven't got any flavor notes yet.
No.
Not yet. We didn't think about it.
Let's think about it.
Now we're gonna think about it. So we're gonna put the next piece in our mouth. We're gonna bite it one time,
Okay.
and then we're gonna let the rest of it just melt and coat our tongues. And as that is happening, we're gonna try to bring into our head and into our mouth memories, flavors, experiences. And as you do that, we're going to do that.
Yep.
And then we'll talk about it. So we're going to go to a little break. If you need more time, pause the video. And then we'll see you soon.
Welcome back, everyone.
That was delicious.
So good. One of the fun things about doing tastings is that I feel like every time we taste our chocolate, I get new flavor notes.
We do.
Or different experiences, especially with something like the sea salt bar, which is a blended origin. So it has multiple different beans in it. So it will
And they're
actually
not always the same.
Exactly. And so it does actually change a little bit,
Just a little
maybe
bit.
every time you have it. But this time, some of the tasting notes that we picked up on were things like chocolate chip cookies,
Fudgy
brownie edges, brown butter.
brown butter. I love brown butter.
I love brown butter.
It's so
And then
good.
built on that, like chocolate croissants, that salty kind of chocolatiness.
like that richness of the
Yes.
butter with a little bit of like the bready flavor, or even like a nice, good, like loaf of bread with a little bit of butter on top, like with a little bit of sea salt sprinkled.
Delicious.
Yeah. So those are
what we
notes.
tasted. Yeah.
Those are,
and I'm sure that you guys had plenty that we didn't come up with, or maybe we're all on the same page. You never know.
Never know.
That's the fun of doing this together.
Yeah.
Let's eat some more chocolate.
Yes. Where did she go? Hey! Oh my God!
Look what I found. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to scare you, but
It's okay. You just scared me. I just got so excited.
I found our next two tasting bars.
This is so exciting. So, wow, same origin. I love it when we do
It's gonna be fun.
So we're gonna tell you about the next two together because they are the same origin, Caranero from Venezuela.
So different.
And they are so different. And that is one of the funnest, most interesting things about tasting chocolate is when you taste the same origin, but in a different percentage or with maybe like a different ingredient, just something different. And you can see how the origin shines differently.
I bet you thought that all chocolate was the same. And I
Absolutely
know
isn't.
that after we taste these next two, you're gonna know for certain there's so much that can be different.
Yeah.
Even if the ingredients are almost the same.
Right, and that comes from terroir. The terroir will affect the flavor immensely. Also,
The processing.
The processing.
This is like a huge part about what makes small batch chocolate different than big batch chocolate.
Correct. Like we can make 80% Caranero, and then you have another small craft bean to bar chocolate maker that makes an 80% Caranero, and it's gonna taste different. And that's just the
fun.
beauty of small craft chocolate making. And we're about to have a great experience with it. So we're gonna start with the goat's milk, which is this guy. And we're gonna tell you a little bit about Caranero, which is in the north central coast of Venezuela. And it is one of, I don't want to say popular, but in a sense popular because it is the most chocolatey bean in a way. And also Caranero has a long tradition of cacao producing, and it's just a really delicious origin. And Venezuela has so many different origins throughout the country, and it's just very amazing. And we, in this case, add a little bit of goat's milk because it one, it smooths out the texture, but also it adds a little bit of like
Tang.
very
Tiny
little
tang.
tang that just happens to work really, really well with this particular bean. So let's go ahead and break up your first piece and just calibrate your palate to 60% Caranero with goat's milk.
Amazing.
Now,
I can't wait to have another bite of this one.
well, don't worry, because we're about to have our second bite.
Beautiful.
So this is the bite that we're gonna think about. So while we think about it, you think about it, we're gonna go on a little break. Remember to pause the video if you need more time. See you soon. Oh my God.
So good.
That was so good.
I love it.
I think this is probably Escazú's all-around favorite bar, maybe?
It might be. I mean,
think so.
we definitely like a lot of our stuff.
We do.
But I don't think anybody at work is like, no thank you on the goat's milk
Yeah,
bar.
like usually a goat's
phenomenal.
milk is, I mean, it's
It's
delicious.
And I also love doing it at tastings because I think people see goat's milk, their brain goes to goat cheese. They think, whoa, that's weird. But when you have this, honestly, I think it's maybe the most accessible chocolate that we have.
Yeah.
It's the one that I gift out a lot because even if you think you don't like dark chocolate, I find it hard to believe you wouldn't enjoy that.
And the cool thing about it, when we were talking about having the same origin, even though there's like goat's milk in here, it's 60%, which is still considered dark chocolate.
Yes.
So it's a dark, we call it dark milk chocolate. And also there's enough cacao in there to be able to taste the nuances of the bean.
Yes. And we tasted such yummy things.
Yes.
Like fudgesicle.
Didn't you? Well, you don't have to. But it's so good because you get that very chocolatey, creamy.
Yes.
It's so good. And then maybe at the end, like a little bit of like yogurt.
Yogurt tang. Yeah.
Like a little bit of that tanginess.
Loved it. There's also kind of, because of the milkiness of it, I kind of got a little bit of like dulce de leche.
Absolutely.
Like
That's
milky caramel.
Maybe even like cajeta, because you have like a little bit of that goat, just not too goaty.
Not too much.
Just a little bit. But yeah, just like a little roasty, toasty sort of thing.
And then that toastiness also brought me to like oatmeal.
Yeah.
Like brown sugar oatmeal specifically.
Oh, oh yeah, with the brown sugar, and then maybe just a little bit of like dried cherries.
Oh,
because I feel like the fruit of the caranero is coming in.
Yes,
just a little bit. And
so good. I would eat all those things, and I would eat this chocolate again and again.
Absolutely.
I hope you guys enjoyed it. Let's move on to
the next
our 80%.
Wait, what'd you do with it? Where'd it go? Did you eat it?
No. Oh. Whoops. I love pockets.
Yes, you do.
Sometimes I lose stuff.
We love pockets.
We love pockets. Anyway, let's do our 80%.
Since we were tasting a sweeter, milky chocolate, even though it's the same origin, let's just take a little sip of water to rinse our palate before we move on to a darker chocolate.
Definitely going to be more intense, a different vibe. But I'm excited.
All right. First bite.
Wow.
Now your palate is ready for Caranero 80%. So we're gonna go on break. as we taste and study. And you're going to taste and study. Remember to pause the video if you need more time. See you soon.
That was so good.
It was delicious.
And so different.
So different, but also with some similarities that obviously come from the origin.
Yes.
And that's
Agreed.
what's just
Yeah, I mean, first, if
magical.
you're just thinking about texture and like the way that it feels in your mouth,
Very
and
different.
80% is totally different
Yes.
because it's got such a high cacao percentage.
right. And it doesn't have, so not only does it not have
Goat's milk.
the goat's milk, but also it's like it has more cacao solids and less sugar. So it's going to melt at a very different rate than the 60% melted. It's going to coat your mouth a little bit different.
There's some tannins, like more tannins in
Definitely
there,
feel
so
the
it might
tannins a little bit
kind
more.
of you might feel that as well, which kind of does this sort of like dry feeling in your mouth. But also, I love tasting the 80% because a lot of people, when they come in, they're like, "Oh, I don't want to have that; it's going to be bitter." And when I eat my 80% bar, it's not bitter.
It's not bitter.
But it also isn't sweet.
Correct.
And so, like, a lot of our tasting notes are more on the savory side.
Yes.
And which is cool.
I mean, actually, that's really a good way where we should be maybe moving more towards when we describe chocolate, not talk about it as, you know, bitter or sweet or bittersweet, even though but bitter is not necessarily quality or, you know, because it's maybe we're talking a little bit more about the tannins, like a red wine, you know, when you have a nice big red wine and it, or tea, black tea or something along those lines, it just kind of makes your tongue a little bit dry. That's not necessarily bitterness.
Right. And certainly there can be bitter qualities in, like,
for sure,
mass-produced chocolate. We said we roast low and slow. We try not to burn our beans at all. But larger producers will over roast their beans to sort of get a more
even flavor.
They don't want those nuances that we're seeking. And so they try to eliminate them by roasting them a lot darker. But in turn, they have to add more stuff to kind of combat that bitterness, which is why at higher percentages, it doesn't taste as good because they don't have as much of those additives. So if you do taste bitterness in, like, grocery store 80% chocolate, you're probably not wrong, but an 80% chocolate isn't by default bitter. I guess, what we're saying. So some of the things that I tasted, that we tasted,
is so exciting,
were sesame and tahini, which is very cool.
I'm going to go with my crazy one.
Yeah.
Because still to this day, I'm surprised that that's what I tasted. You know, the rice seasoning, the Japanese rice seasoning.
Yeah. With seaweed and sesame seeds.
The seaweed and the sesame seeds.
Furikake.
The furikake. That's what I tasted.
That's crazy.
And I feel like that kind of rolls us in also into the like umami flavor of it. It's a very, I'm still salivating.
Yeah, it definitely does that like Parmesan cheese does, or
you're just,
mushrooms. I feel like
mushrooms
for sure.
And we're talking about we talked about the difference, right, in the goat's milk in this one, and how it melts differently, and how the creaminess of the goat's milk and the buttery aspects of it. But we did talk about croissant, and we talked about bread and butter. And in this one, we taste, there's still a little bit of that baked good component, just not in the buttery sense.
Yeah.
And we talked a little bit about water crackers. So you get that
kind of like snappy, toasty,
a little toasty,
very lean.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that is also a characteristic that will bring it together, as well as a little bit of that dried cherry flavor
same
note
fruitiness.
that you get. So that's where you can see how different the exact same bean can be when
Yes.
it is
In two different
correct
methods.
two different ways.
That was awesome.
It's always a really fun experience for us to have these origins side by side, and we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us for this tasting. We had a great time, and we're sure that you did too. Now that you've learned a lot about craft small batch chocolate, how it's made and what makes it different, and gotten to taste that difference, you understand what makes it special. And I think that you guys can take what you've learned and continue to taste chocolate, show off to your friends, have a party, or just continue learning and expanding your own knowledge.
Absolutely. And you can also taste this chocolate with another chocolate maker, so you can see the difference on how we all work so hard and curate our ingredients so well and
make something truly
unique,
Yeah.
special, delicious, and different amongst all of ourselves. So
We'll hope to see you again.
yeah, see you soon.